August 16, 1977, 2:30 p.m. Ginger Alden climbs the stairs to Elvis Presley's bedroom at Graceland Mansion. She's looking for her fiancé, who went to the bathroom around 2 o'clock, saying, "Honey, don't fall asleep." Ginger pushes open the bathroom door and sees the body of the 42-year-old king of rock and roll sprawled face down on the floor. His pajama pants pulled down to his knees, a book about sex and psychology in his hands. This was the final scene of one of show business's most tragic stories. But what happened next turned the world icon's death into a carefully orchestrated performance. While Ginger screamed for help, people were already scrambling through the mansion with one goal: hide the truth. Joe Esposito, Elvis's head of security and closest friend, was first to assess the disaster. He knew that dozens of prescription bottles lay in the artist's bedroom, and his blood contained lethal concentrations of 14 different drugs. Within minutes, Esposito removed all evidence, hid the medications, and instructed staff to keep their mouths shut. Dr. George Nicopolis, Elvis's personal physician, arrived 20 minutes after the call. But instead of attempting resuscitation, he focused on another task: how to explain the death of his patient, to whom he'd prescribed over 5,000 doses of various narcotic and psychotropic drugs in the past 7 months alone. The official story was set before the ambulance even arrived. Heart attack, no drugs, no suspicious circumstances. Just a tragic accident involving a young, healthy performer. Maurice Elliott, the Shelby County medical examiner, later admitted, "I faced unprecedented pressure from the family, management, and even city officials. Everyone wanted one thing: for the cause of death to read heart failure. Any mention of drugs had to disappear. But truth always leaves traces." A secret copy of the full toxicology report, which only surfaced in 1994, revealed a horrifying picture. Elvis's system contained codeine at 10 times the therapeutic dose, morphine, Demerol, chlordiazepoxide, diazepam, and 9 other substances. The codeine concentration alone was enough to kill a healthy person. Dr. Eric Manson, an independent toxicologist from California, later commented, "Elvis Presley didn't die of a heart attack. He died of polydrug intoxication, in simple terms, an overdose. Everything else was an attempt to protect his reputation." Why was the king of rock and roll's death so carefully hidden and whitewashed? The answer wasn't just about preserving the artist's image. Behind Graceland's facade was an entire industry built on exploiting Elvis's talent. Record companies, concert promoters, an army of employees living off his fame. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's legendary manager, received news of his client's death in Portland, where he was preparing a new tour. His first words weren't about losing a friend, but about money. "Nothing has changed. This is just the beginning." Parker understood that a dead Elvis could make more money than a living one, but only if the legend remained untainted. Within the first 24 hours after his death, a massive cover-up operation was launched. Medical records disappeared from hospital archives. Witnesses received instructions to stay silent. Journalists were distracted with touching stories about the final days of this simple boy from Memphis. But amid the chaos and lies, there were people who knew the truth. Chris Nichols, a guitarist in Elvis's band, later revealed, "We all saw what was happening. For the last 2 years, he was a walking dead man. They had to help him onto the stage between songs he could barely stand. But the machine kept running. Tickets sold, money flowed." Linda Thompson, Elvis's girlfriend from 1972 to 1976, was even more candid. Everyone around him knew how this would end. Doctors, friends, managers. They were all accomplices in a slow suicide. And nobody stopped this machine. The death in Graceland's bathroom wasn't the beginning of tragedy. It was the finale. The real tragedy had lasted for years. The story of a talented man slowly and systematically destroyed by those who should have protected him. In the coming chapters of our investigation, we'll trace how this deadly cocktail of circumstances formed. Childhood trauma, toxic environment, medical negligence, creative frustration. We'll show that Elvis Presley's death wasn't an accident, but the inevitable result of a system that consumed artists and discarded their bodies. But the most horrifying part of this story is that all its participants continued profiting from the tragedy for years after August 16, 1977. And perhaps they still are today. Elvis Presley's story began with a tragedy that even his closest biographers kept quiet. On January 8, 1935, in a two-room shack in Tupelo, Mississippi, Gladys Presley gave birth to twins. The first was a stillborn boy, Jesse Garon. 35 minutes later came the living child, Elvis Aaron. One brother left this world without taking a single breath. The other spent his entire life breathing for both of them. Elvis was never just one person, his cousin Nash Pritchard later said. He was the surviving twin, and that role broke his psyche in childhood. Gladys constantly reminded him about his dead brother, telling him he had to live a full life for himself and for Jesse. Vernon Presley, the future star's father, was a small-time crook without steady work. He forged checks, sold moonshine, and committed petty theft. In 1938, he got 3 years in prison for defrauding farm subsidies. 3-year-old Elvis was left with his mother, who made her son the sole meaning of her existence. Gladys Love Presley suffered from what we'd now call severe depression. Losing one child, poverty, and a criminal husband, all of this poured into an unhealthy attachment to her surviving son. She slept in the same bed with him until his teenage years, walked him to school hand in hand, and lived in panic at the thought of letting him go for even an hour. "Mama was my best friend," Elvis later recalled. "We told each other everything. There were no secrets between us." Behind these words lay a toxic codependency that made any normal relationships with women nearly impossible. The Presley family's poverty was absolute and humiliating. They lived in a white poor ghetto, wore clothes from charity boxes, and skimped on food. Elvis went to school in worn jeans and his older cousin's hand-me-down shirts. Classmates teased him, calling him country boy and poor trash. But the worst part, at age 11, the boy first tried drugs. Gladys, suffering from chronic back pain, regularly took painkillers. When Elvis had a toothache or caught a cold, his mother gave him adult pills, the same phenobarbital and codeine that would kill him 30 years later. Pills were normal life in our family, Elvis's cousin Dolores Presley recalled. For headaches, insomnia, nerves, sadness. Gladys always knew which pill to take for what, and she taught Elvis from childhood to solve problems with chemicals. In 1948, the family moved to Memphis, the city that would become both the throne and grave of the future king. The 13-year-old found himself in a completely different world, urban, harsh, full of temptations. The neighborhoods where they rented were crawling with drug dealers, prostitutes, and petty criminals. It was in Memphis that Elvis discovered black music, blues, gospel, rhythm, and blues. He spent hours wandering Beale Street, where legendary musicians played, soaking up sounds it was improper for white teenagers to listen to. This music became both his salvation and his curse. Salvation, because it gave him an outlet for pent-up emotions. A curse, because in the conservative society of the 1950s, black music was associated with promiscuity, drugs, and crime. Elvis immediately found himself cast as an outsider. In 1953, 18-year-old Elvis recorded his first song at Sam Phillips' studio for $4, a birthday gift for his mother. But even then, there was something unhealthy about the gesture. A boy from a poor family spending his last money to please his overprotective mother. Sam Phillips, owner of Sun Records, later remembered, "Elvis was the shyest kid I ever met. But when he started singing, a transformation happened, like someone else took over, someone bolder, more sexual, more free." This split personality, quiet mama's boy by day and defiant rebel on stage, would become key to understanding the entire tragedy that followed. Elvis learned to be different for different people, but never figured out who he really was. His first success came in 1954 with "That's All Right." Within months, an unknown truck driver became a local sensation. Money, fame, fans, everything hit the 19-year-old at once. And here another fatal character trait emerged: Elvis's inability to say no. He agreed to any concerts, any interviews, any fan requests. Not because he craved fame, but because from childhood he was used to being a good boy for everyone. Elvis was a prisoner of his own kindness, music critic Peter Guralnick explained. He physically couldn't disappoint people by refusing them. This trait, endearing in ordinary life, became deadly in show business. Seeing her son's first paychecks, Gladys Presley completely lost her head. She quit her job and focused entirely on managing Elvis's career. She bought his clothes, chose his hairstyles, screened his girlfriends. The 19-year-old star still asked Mama's permission for every move. In 1956, after signing with RCA and releasing Heartbreak Hotel, Elvis became a national sensation. But with fame came problems no one had prepared him for: media pressure, conservative criticism, colleagues' unenvy. Preachers declared his music demonic. Politicians demanded his performances be banned. Parents forbade children from buying his records. Elvis, raised in a strict religious family, took this criticism deeply to heart. He started doubting himself very early, guitarist Scotty Moore remembered. He'd say, "What if they're right? What if I really am corrupting young people?" These doubts ate him up inside. By the end of 1956, all the preconditions for future tragedy had formed in 21-year-old Elvis's life. An unhealthy dependence on his mother that blocked normal maturation, a habit of using drugs to solve problems, an inability to refuse people and defend personal boundaries, deep complexes from his impoverished childhood and society's criticism, a split personality, public and private. All that remained was finding people who would exploit these weaknesses. And such people were found very quickly. In 1955, a man entered Elvis Presley's life who would determine his entire future: Tom Parker. He presented himself as a colonel in the American Army, an honorary citizen of West Virginia, and an experienced promoter. In reality, he was an illegal immigrant from the Netherlands named Andreas Cornelis van Kook. who had fled Europe after committing murder. Parker was a brilliant con man, said music producer Felix Pappalardi. He created his own legend from scratch. Military career, Washington connections, experience with stars. It was all lies, but very convincing lies. Gladys Presley met Parker with suspicion. Her maternal instinct sensed danger in this portly man with a cigar who talked about her son as a product and commodity. But 20-year-old Elvis was fascinated. Finally, here was a real grown man who promised to make him a world star. The contract signed in August 1955 became the most expensive mistake in show business history. Under its terms, Parker received not the standard 10–15% of the artist's income, but 25%. Later, this figure grew to 50%. Essentially, Elvis worked for his manager, not the other way around. But the numbers were just the tip of the iceberg. The real trap was that Parker gained complete control over Elvis's career. Song selection, concert schedules, movie studio contracts, even his personal life. Tom turned Elvis into a puppet, recalled producer Steve Binder. Every decision went through him. Elvis couldn't meet with a journalist, couldn't choose musicians for recording, couldn't even change his hairstyle without Parker's permission. The first years of collaboration seemed mutually beneficial. Parker really did transform a regional star into a national idol. He organized nationwide tours, secured a contract with RCA Records, and arranged famous television appearances. But warning signs appeared even then. Parker categorically forbade Elvis from performing abroad, citing document complications. In reality, he feared that border checks would reveal his illegal status. Elvis could have been the first global pop star, analyzed musicologist Dave Marsh. The Beatles were inspired by his music. Europe was ready to embrace him with open arms. But Parker locked him in an American cage. In 1958, Elvis was drafted into the Army. Parker presented this as a patriotic gesture, but military service actually became salvation for the manager. 2 years to finally cement control over his charge. It was in the Army that Elvis first tried amphetamines, Dexedrine, given to soldiers to stay alert during night duties. When he wrote to Parker about this, the manager showed no concern. Instead, he advised to stay in shape by any means necessary. After returning from the Army in 1960, their relationship changed dramatically. Gladys Presley had died in 1958 from a heart attack caused by alcoholism and depression. Elvis lost the last person who could oppose Parker's influence. After his mother's death, Elvis became emotionally dependent on the Colonel, explains psychologist Albert Goldman. Parker replaced his father, mother, and friend. It was classic codependency. Parker immediately took advantage of the situation. He signed a binding contract with MGM Studios. Elvis had to make 3 films a year for a decade. Script quality didn't matter, only box office receipts. Tom turned the greatest rock singer into a factory for mediocre musicals, raged critic Lester Bangs. Elvis was forbidden from recording serious music, experimenting, or developing as an artist. From 1960 to 1968, Elvis made 27 films. Most were so bad that the actor was embarrassed to mention them in interviews. But money flowed like water into Parker's pockets. Particularly cynical was the manager's attitude toward his charge's creative ambitions. When Elvis asked permission to record a blues or gospel album, Parker would respond, "Why do you need that music? You're a white guy. Sing white music." In 1968, a miracle happened. Elvis was allowed to record a television special, an hour-long program where he could sing whatever he wanted. This show, known as the '68 Comeback Special, became a creative triumph and proof of what kind of artist he could have been without Parker's chains. But instead of building on this success, Parker trapped Elvis in a new cage, a contract with the International Casino in Las Vegas. 700 concerts over 7 years, practically slave labor conditions for any artist. Las Vegas was the perfect place for the Colonel, explained biographer Peter Guralnick. A closed environment, controlled audience, no surprises. Elvis became a tourist attraction. By the early 1970s, their relationship resembled a prison system. Parker controlled Elvis's every move, who he met, what he ate, what pills he took. Any attempts at rebellion were crushed with threats of financial ruin. Tom constantly repeated, "Without me, you're nothing," recalled bodyguard Red West. And Elvis believed it. He was afraid to be alone, afraid to make decisions. Most terrifying, Parker knew about his charge's drug addiction and used it. When Elvis demanded more creative freedom, the manager would say, "In your condition, you'd better not experiment." In 1973, open conflict erupted. Elvis demanded contract termination and the right to tour worldwide. Parker responded with a counter-ultimatum. He presented a bill for $10 million, supposedly the artist's debts to him over the years. This figure was pure fantasy, analyzed financial consultant Lamar Fike, but Elvis believed it. He'd always been bad with math and couldn't tell truth from deception. By the mid-1970s, Parker had completely transformed from manager to caretaker of a dying artist. He didn't try to help with addiction treatment, didn't seek new creative projects, didn't care about his charge's health. He was only interested in money. In the final years, the Colonel behaved like a circus owner with a trained bear, said musician James Burton. Elvis was a source of income to him, not a human being. On August 16, 1977, upon learning of Elvis's death, Parker said a phrase that revealed the complete cynicism of their relationship. "This changes nothing. Dead Elvis is worth more than living Elvis." And he was right. In the 2 years after the artist's death, Parker made more money from his memory than in the previous 10 years of working together. Was Tom Parker Elvis Presley's savior? In some ways, yes. He turned a talented provincial into an international star. But the price of this salvation proved too high. Creative degradation, personal dependency, and ultimately, premature death. The paradox is that Parker really did love his charge, but with the love of an owner who sees a person only as a source of profit. This toxic attachment destroyed one of the greatest artists of the 20th century. In 1956, at the height of his musical fame, Elvis Presley signed a contract with Hal Wallace Productions. For the 21-year-old from Memphis, it seemed like a dream come true. Hollywood, big money, and the chance to become not just a singer, but an actor. No one suspected then that this contract would become a death sentence for one of the greatest musical talents of the century. His first film, Love Me Tender, 1956, still maintained the appearance of serious cinema. Elvis played a supporting role, but the film had a complete storyline, professional cast, and decent budget. Critics were lenient with his debut, though not exactly impressed. The film's box office success, $4 million against a $1 million budget, instantly changed how studios viewed their singing actor. Producers realized Elvis Presley's name guaranteed profits regardless of the film's quality. This discovery proved fatal. After that first success, studios stopped caring about scripts, recalled director Norman Taurog. The formula was simple: beautiful girls, exotic locations, 5 or 6 songs, and Elvis in the lead role. Nothing else mattered. Colonel Parker, sensing a goldmine, struck an unprecedented deal with MGM: 3 films a year for an entire decade. Elvis would earn $125,000 per picture, plus profit sharing. But for this money, he sold his creative soul. The second film, Loving You, 1957, already showed where his career was heading. A primitive plot: small-town singer becomes a star. Cardboard characters, predictable dialogue, and musical numbers inserted without any logic. Elvis tried to resist. In a 1957 interview, he said, "I want to be a real actor, like James Dean or Marlon Brando. I don't want to spend my life playing singing cowboys." But the system had already consumed him. His contract obligated him to appear in whatever the studio offered. Parker suppressed any attempts at creative rebellion, and the money, enormous money for those times, made the golden cage comfortable. Jailhouse Rock, 1957, became the last film where Elvis seemed truly alive. You could still feel his charisma, sexuality, and rebellious spirit. The dance number to the title song became cinema history. But by 1958, before leaving for the Army, Elvis appeared in King Creole, a film that could have been a turning point. Director Michael Curtiz, who made Casablanca, created a serious drama about a New Orleans musician. Elvis showed real acting ability. If he had continued in that direction, he could have become an outstanding dramatic actor. Believe critic Pauline Kael. He had natural talent, magnetism, and the ability to convey emotion without words. But 2 years of military service broke that momentum. When Elvis returned in 1960, Hollywood had changed. Younger stars had emerged, and fashion had shifted toward realism. Studios decided not to take risks and forced Elvis into a format that guaranteed profits. The factory production of identical musicals began. G.I. Blues in 1960, Blue Hawaii in 1961, Follow That Dream, 1962. All films followed the same pattern. Elvis plays a simple guy who ends up in an exotic place, meets a beautiful girl, sings several songs, and gets married in the finale. It was intellectual murder, complained screenwriter Alan Weiss. We turned one of the era's brightest performers into a comic book character. Elvis himself deeply felt this creative degradation. Actor George Klein, one of his closest friends, remembered, he was ashamed of his films. He'd say, "George, I'm not an idiot. I understand I'm making garbage, but what can I do?" The period from 1963 to 1965 was especially painful when the Beatles emerged. While the Liverpool Quartet conquered the world with revolutionary albums, Elvis was making Viva Las Vegas and Girl Happy, films that even teenagers didn't take seriously. The Beatles were doing what Elvis should have been doing, stated music critic Dave Marsh. They experimented, grew creatively, changed their sound from album to album. Meanwhile, he was locked in a museum display case. By the mid-1960s, Elvis had completely lost faith in movies. He appeared on set depressed, performed his work mechanically, and between takes, sat in his trailer reading philosophy and religion books. Director George Sidney recalled, Working with Elvis became torture for everyone. He hated what he was doing, and everyone on set could feel it. A great performer had become a tired craftsman. The film soundtracks also deteriorated. While Elvis recorded revolutionary rock and roll hits in the 1950s, the movie songs were faceless products for mass consumption. Do the clam, yoga is as yoga does. There's no room to rumba in a sports car. These songs were an insult to the man who created Hound Dog and Jailhouse Rock, said producer Steve Binder. Elvis's talent was simply being squandered. By 1967, Elvis's films stopped breaking even at the American box office. The golden vein had dried up, but the machine kept running on autopilot. Studios cut budgets and economized on everything except the star's fee. The final straw was Change of Habit, 1969, where 34-year-old Elvis played a doctor in love with a nun. The absurdity was obvious to everyone, including the actor himself. Elvis cried in his dressing room, remembered his stunt double Lance Legault. He'd say, "Lance, what happened to me? I used to be the king of rock and roll, and now I'm playing some silly doctor in a silly movie." Over 13 years of his Hollywood career, Elvis appeared in 31 films. None are considered cinema classics. Most weren't even reissued on DVD. It was a colossal waste of talent, time, and opportunity. What's especially tragic is that during all these years, Elvis barely recorded any studio albums. From 1960 to 1968, only 2 serious records were released. His Hand in Mine, gospel, and How Great Thou Art, religious music. Everything else was movie soundtracks. We lost an entire decade of Elvis's creativity, calculated musicologist Ernst Jorgensen. Imagine what albums he could have recorded in the 1960s if he hadn't been trapped in Hollywood's prison. Hollywood didn't just take away new Elvis songs from the world. It broke him as a person, undermined his self-confidence, and turned a living artist into a commercial product. When Elvis finally broke free from the cinema trap in 1968 and recorded his famous television special, he showed what a great performer he could have remained all those years, but time was lost. His health was damaged, and the habit of passivity had become ingrained in his character. Hollywood didn't kill Elvis physically, but it killed him creatively. And this murder stretched over 13 agonizing years. In September 1959, at an Air Force Base house in Bad Nauheim, where Private Elvis Presley was stationed, a meeting took place that would change 2 lives forever, and not for the better. The 24-year-old king of rock and roll met 14-year-old Priscilla Beaulieu, the daughter of an American officer. What began as an innocent infatuation became one of the most toxic love stories of the 20th century. Priscilla was an exact copy of young Gladys Presley, analyzed psychologist Albert Goldman. Dark hair, big eyes, delicate build. Elvis was looking for a replacement for his deceased mother, and he found her in a schoolgirl. The 10-year age gap was just the tip of the iceberg. The real problem was that Elvis saw Priscilla not as an equal partner, but as an object to mold in his own image. From their first days together, he began reshaping her appearance, changed her hairstyle, picked her wardrobe, taught her how to apply makeup. Priscilla later recalled, "Elvis wanted me to look exactly as he imagined the perfect woman. My own preferences didn't matter." When Elvis returned to America in 1960, he insisted that 15-year-old Priscilla move in with him at Graceland. Officially, it was to complete her education. In reality, it was to completely control her life. It was like a kidnapping, Priscilla's mother, Anne Beaulieu, later said. My daughter was still a child, and he took her into his world where only his rules applied. At Graceland, Priscilla found herself in a golden cage. Elvis forbade her from meeting classmates, attending school parties, or talking to boys. He chose her clothes, books, and movies. Even the girl's menstrual cycle was under his control. He forced her to take hormonal medications to regulate natural processes. Elvis treated Priscilla like a living doll, testified Red West, the family's bodyguard. She had to look perfect 24 hours a day. Even at home, she wore full makeup and evening gowns. The paradox was that despite his obsession with Priscilla's appearance, Elvis avoided physical intimacy. Their relationship remained platonic for years, not out of respect for her age, but because of Elvis's own psychological issues. He divided women into two categories, explained psychotherapist Dr. Jane Richards: Madonnas and whores. Priscilla was a Madonna, pure, untouchable, perfect. He satisfied his physical needs with others. Indeed, throughout his relationship with Priscilla, Elvis cheated on her with fans, actresses, and strippers. But he considered these affairs not serious, while Priscilla was his true love. By the late 1960s, Priscilla began rebelling against total control. In 1967, at age 22, she demanded the right to her own life for the first time. She wanted to attend college, find work, make friends. Elvis reacted with panic. He increased his drug doses and became even more suspicious and jealous. In May 1967, in a desperate attempt to keep Priscilla, he proposed. It wasn't a romantic wedding, but a business deal, remembered the bride's friend Joan Esposito. Elvis was buying himself a wife, like he bought cars or houses. The wedding took place on May 1st, 1967 in Las Vegas, an 8-minute ceremony in a hotel room at the Alden. Only the closest friends and relatives attended. No celebrations, no joy. Even in the wedding photos, the newlyweds looked tense and distant. Marriage didn't solve their problems. It only made them worse. Elvis continued cheating, continued controlling his wife's every move, continued treating her like a beautiful object rather than a person. The only joy was the birth of their daughter, Lisa Marie, in February 1968. But even Priscilla's motherhood was under her husband's strict control. He chose the nanny, feeding schedule, and toys for the child. Elvis was afraid of an adult woman, analyzed biographer Peter Guralnick. While Priscilla was a girl, he felt strong and important. But when she became a mother, a real woman with her own needs, he was lost. By 1970, their marriage had essentially collapsed. Elvis was rarely home, spending time in Las Vegas with mistresses and drugs. Priscilla felt lonely in her own house. The turning point came when Priscilla met karate instructor Mike Stone in 1972. For the first time in 13 years, she felt like a living woman, not a museum exhibit. Mike treated me as an equal, Priscilla recalled. He was interested in my opinions, listened to my thoughts, didn't try to change me. It was a revelation. The affair with the instructor was the last straw. In August 1972, Priscilla told Elvis she wanted a divorce. His reaction was predictable: rage, threats, attempts at blackmail. He screamed that he would destroy me if I left, Priscilla recounted. He threatened to take our daughter, cut off my money, ruin my reputation. But I was no longer that frightened girl. The divorce was finalized in October 1973. Under the agreement, Priscilla received substantial compensation. $725,000 in cash, a house in Beverly Hills, and 5% of Elvis's company shares. But most importantly, she gained her freedom. After the divorce, I had to learn to be myself, Priscilla said in 1980s interviews. For 13 years, I was Elvis's shadow. Now I needed to figure out who I really was. Elvis took the separation hard. He blamed everyone except himself. Mike Stone, Priscilla's friends, bad influences. But most importantly, he couldn't understand that he had turned his wife into an emotional invalid. After the divorce, their relationship had paradoxically improved, no longer needing to control Priscilla 24/7. Elvis could finally see her as a person. They began communicating normally, raising their daughter together, even becoming friends. Only when we stopped being husband and wife could we become friends, Priscilla explained. Elvis was a good person, but very sick. His love was destructive. On August 16, 1977, Priscilla came to Graceland for her ex-husband's funeral. In her memoir, she wrote, "I mourn not only the death of my child's father, but the collapse of a beautiful dream that could have become reality." The story of Elvis and Priscilla isn't a romantic fairy tale about love, but a clinical case of emotional dependency. He sought in her a mother replacement and the perfect toy. She sought protection and stability. But real love, equal, mature, free, never existed between them. Their relationship was toxic from the very beginning, summarized family psychologist Dr. Robert Firestone. Elvis didn't know how to love with healthy love, and Priscilla fell into his orbit too early to understand the difference between love and dependency. There's a dark truth about Elvis Presley's drug addiction. He never bought drugs on the street. He never dealt with dealers. He never broke the law in any legal sense. Every substance that ultimately killed him was legally prescribed by doctors and obtained from pharmacies with prescriptions. This makes his tragedy even more cynical. The system meant to heal methodically destroyed one of the greatest artists of the 20th century. The main architect of Elvis's drug dependency was Dr. George Constantine Nichopoulos, a Greek-American who served as the star's personal physician from 1967 to 1977. This man, with his noble face and respectable reputation, turned medical practice into a drug addiction factory. Dr. Nick, as Elvis's circle called him, started as an ordinary family doctor in Memphis. But when he treated Elvis for a saddle nose fracture in 1967, he quickly realized his famous patient could become a gold mine. Elvis came to Nichopoulos in a vulnerable state. After years of Hollywood's grind, he suffered from chronic insomnia, depression, and anxiety attacks. A normal doctor would have recommended therapy, lifestyle changes, healthy sleep habits. Nichopoulos chose a simpler path: pills for every problem. Dr. Nick was a dealer in a white coat, said narcologist Forrest Tennant, who studied Elvis's medical records. He turned treatment into feeding a drug addiction. The scheme was brilliantly simple. Elvis complained of insomnia. He got Seconal and Tuinal. He complained of fatigue. He got Dexedrine and Ritalin. He complained of pain. He got Demerol and Dilaudid. For every problem, there was a magic pill. By 1970, the list of drugs Elvis regularly took filled an entire page. Barbiturates for sleep, amphetamines for energy, painkillers for comfort, tranquilizers for calm. Nichopoulos prescribed everything without limits, like playing chemical roulette with his patient's life. "I saw Dr. Nick's prescriptions," testified pharmacist Jack Kirsch. In a single visit, he could prescribe 100 Demerol tablets, 50 dilaudid tablets, 200 dexedrine capsules. That was a dose for an entire hospital, not one person. But Nicopolis wasn't the only doctor-dealer in Elvis's story. In different cities where tours took place, local doctors readily prescribed any drugs the star wanted. Dr. Max Shapiro in Las Vegas, Dr. Thomas Newton in Los Angeles, Dr. David Knott in Memphis, all participated in the slow poisoning of the great artist. Elvis was a walking pharmacy, recalled his bodyguard Dave Hebler. At any given moment, he had 15 to 20 different drugs in his pockets. He took pills like normal people eat candy. Particularly cynical was the system of justifications the doctors built. Every drug had medical indications: glaucoma for narcotic painkillers, megacolon for laxatives, hypertension for depressants. Formally, everything looked legal and justified. Dr. Nicopolis later defended himself. Elvis was a special patient with special needs. Normal doses didn't work on him. We had to increase the amount of medication. This was a blatant lie. Medical records showed Elvis's drug tolerance grew precisely because of constantly increasing doses. The doctors were creating the very problem they then tried to solve with even higher doses. By the mid-1970s, Elvis's drug addiction was obvious to everyone around him. He fell asleep during conversations, forgot song lyrics at concerts, lost coordination on stage. But instead of treatment, he received new medications. Dr. Nick treated drug addiction symptoms with drugs, explained toxicologist Larry Hutchings. If Elvis was too stimulated from amphetamines, they gave him depressants. If too sedated from barbiturates, they gave him stimulants. Elvis's relatives and friends repeatedly tried to intervene. In 1975, his father, Vernon, even hired a private detective to gather evidence of medical malpractice. But the system was too powerful. Colonel Parker protected Dr. Nick because he understood that a sober Elvis might demand contract renegotiation, explained biographer Albert Goldman. An addicted Elvis was more manageable. The final months of the artist's life were particularly horrifying. From January to August 1977, Dr. Nicopolis prescribed Elvis 5,300 pills and capsules, an average of 25 drugs per day. Among them were the strongest narcotics: morphine, codeine, Demerol, dilaudid. This was a slow suicide program, stated narcologist Forrest Tennant. Nobody can take such doses and stay alive. It's amazing Elvis lasted as long as he did. On August 16, 1977, the inevitable happened. Toxicological examinations showed traces of 14 different drugs in Elvis's blood at concentrations far exceeding therapeutic norms. Dr. Nicopolis denied responsibility until the end. At a press conference after his patient's death, he declared Elvis died of a heart attack. Drugs had nothing to do with it. But the truth eventually prevailed. In 1980, the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners suspended Nicopolis's license for 3 months for excessive and unjustified prescription of narcotic drugs. In 1995, his license was revoked permanently. Dr. Nick killed Elvis as surely as if he had shot him in the head, said the Shelby County prosecutor. But he did it slowly, methodically, under the cover of medical ethics. Elvis's drug addiction story is a systemic tragedy. Not only greedy doctors are to blame, but also an indifferent entourage, corrupt officials, and a soulless entertainment industry. But the main guilt lies with a medical system that turned treatment into drug trafficking. Elvis Presley became a victim not of street dealers, but of people in white coats who had sworn to do no harm. Their oath became a death sentence for the king of rock and roll. In Elvis Presley's world, there was a group of men who never left his side. A dozen guys aged 25 to 45, officially listed as bodyguards, drivers, and assistants. The press dubbed them the Memphis Mafia for their Corsican-like loyalty to their leader and their willingness to fulfill his every whim. But behind the facade of friendship lay one of the most toxic systems of codependency in show business history. Joe Esposito, Red West, Sonny West, Lamar Fike, Charlie Hodge, Jerry Schilling, every Elvis fan knew these names. They appeared in every photograph, attended every concert, and lived at Graceland like family members. But their role in the star's life was far more sinister than it appeared. The Memphis Mafia was a system of mutual parasitism, analyzed sociologist David Reisman. Elvis bought their loyalty with money and status. They sold him the illusion of friendship and constant admiration. Most of the Mafia members met Elvis in school or the army, when he was just a regular working-class guy. But when fame came, these relationships changed dramatically. Childhood friends became hired companions. Elvis paid them generous salaries, $500 to $1,500 per week. Very good money for those times. He bought houses, cars, and jewelry for their wives. He paid medical bills, children's education, and family vacations. In return, he demanded absolute loyalty 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Elvis bought himself a family, explained psychologist Peter Whitmer. He was terrified of loneliness and willing to pay any amount for the constant presence of friends. But this pseudo-family operated by twisted rules. None of the Mafia members had the right to criticize Elvis, contradict him, or offer alternative viewpoints. Their job was simple: admire and obey. Red West, one of the oldest Mafia members, later admitted, "We were afraid to tell Elvis the truth. If you said something he didn't like, tomorrow you could be out of a job, homeless with no means of support." Particularly destructive was the Mafia's role in Elvis's drug addiction. Instead of preventing their friend's self-destruction, they actively participated in it. If Elvis needed pills at 3 a.m., one of us would drive to Dr. Nick, recalled Sonny West. If he wanted to try a new drug, we found ways to get it. We weren't friends, we were accomplices. The Mafia members used drugs alongside Elvis. This created a false sense of camaraderie and unity, but when Elvis lost consciousness from an overdose, they simply waited for him to wake up instead of calling doctors. Lamar Fike, the most candid of the group, later said, "We all knew Elvis was dying, but nobody wanted to lose their job. Telling the truth was economically disadvantageous." The system encouraged the worst traits in everyone involved. Elvis became a capricious tyrant who could fire someone for a wrong look. The Mafia members turned into lackeys, ready to commit any betrayal to keep their positions. "There was no real friendship between us," admitted Jerry Schilling. "There was economic dependency disguised as loyalty. Elvis understood this and despised us for it, but he kept paying." Particularly toxic were the internal intrigues within the group. The Mafia members constantly competed for Elvis's attention, reported on each other, and plotted against their competitors. This created an atmosphere of paranoid suspicion. "Elvis set us against each other," remembered Red West. He'd tell one person that another was criticizing him behind his back. We constantly had to prove our loyalty. By the mid-1970s, the Memphis Mafia had become a real cult with all the classic signs: isolation from the outside world, total control by the leader, suppression of critical thinking, and economic dependence. Elvis dictated the entire group's lifestyle: when to sleep, what to eat, how to dress, who to talk to. The Mafia members had no right to privacy. They had to be available at any moment, day or night. "We lost ourselves in this system," Joe Esposito later said. "We forgot who we were without Elvis. We became extensions of his personality." The breaking point came in 1976, when three of the oldest Mafia members, Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler, were fired for insubordination. They had dared to suggest Elvis get treatment for his drug addiction. Elvis saw this as betrayal, Red West recalled. He said we had forgotten our place, and he threw us out of his life like used tissues. The fired Mafia members wrote an exposé book, Elvis, What Happened, which was published shortly before the singer's death. In it, they revealed the truth about his drug addiction, fits of rage, and self-destructive behavior. "We tried to save him with one last desperate attempt," explained Sonny West. "We thought public exposure would make Elvis come to his senses, but it was too late." On August 16, 1977, when Ginger Alden found Elvis's body in the bathroom, the remaining Mafia members were first on the scene. Their first reaction wasn't grief, it was fear. What would happen to them now? "We panicked not because of losing a friend, but because of losing our jobs," Lamar Fikey honestly admitted. "Elvis was our only source of income. Without him, we had nothing." After the funeral, the Memphis Mafia quickly disbanded. Some tried to trade on their memories. Others looked for new work. Others drank themselves into oblivion. None of them managed to build successful, independent careers. "We wasted our lives orbiting Elvis," Joe Esposito concluded. "We became professional friends to a man who didn't need friends, he needed treatment." The story of the Memphis Mafia is a parable about how money destroys human relationships. Elvis wanted to buy love and friendship, but got only imitation. The Mafia members wanted an easy life, but lost their own identities. In the end, everyone lost. Elvis died alone, surrounded by people who were afraid to contradict him. And his friends spent the best years of their lives in a golden cage they could never escape. Between 1969 and 1977, Elvis Presley performed over 1,100 concerts, an incredible number for any artist. But behind this impressive statistic lay a torturous truth. The final years of his career became a public agony witnessed by millions of fans worldwide. The '68 comeback special was Elvis's last flash of genuine talent. In black leather, guitar in hand, he reminded the world what a great artist he could be. But the following year showed this was a swan song, not a revival. In July 1969, Elvis began his Las Vegas contract, 60 shows at the International Hotel over 2 months. The early performances still held glimpses of former greatness, energy, charisma, vocal power. Critics wrote about the King's triumphant return. But even then, careful observers noticed warning signs. Elvis often forgot lyrics, would stop mid-song to drink water or talk to musicians. Sometimes he lost his balance on stage for no apparent reason. By 1970, it was clear something was wrong with Elvis, recalled backup vocalist J.D. Sumner. He was taking too many pills before concerts. Said it helped him get into character. By 1973, the decline was obvious to everyone. Elvis had gained weight, his movements became clumsy, his voice less stable. But worst of all, he began falling asleep right on stage. Guitarist James Burton remembered, "Elvis could fall asleep at the piano in the middle of a song. We'd keep playing, hoping he'd wake up. Sometimes we had to wake him in front of the audience." Concerts became Russian roulette. Nobody knew what condition Elvis would appear in. Sometimes he was relatively alert and could give a decent show. But increasingly, audiences witnessed a pitiful sight. A bloated, drugged man who could barely stand. Colonel Parker forbade canceling concerts regardless of Elvis's condition, testified Joe Esposito. He'd say, "The show must go on," even if Elvis was unconscious an hour before performing. The touring years from 1974 to 1977 were especially brutal. Elvis, accustomed to Vegas's stationary stage, struggled with travel, time zone changes, and unfamiliar hotels. Drugs became his only way to cope with stress. Linda Thompson, his girlfriend during those years, recalled, "Before each concert, Elvis took a whole cocktail of drugs, stimulants for energy, painkillers for comfort, tranquilizers for calm. It was a chemical balance on the edge of disaster." By 1975, Elvis's physical condition was critical. He weighed over 260 pounds, breathing was difficult, coordination impaired. But the concerts continued, 100 to 150 per year. Elvis hated the stage in his final years, admitted musician Ron Tutt. He said he felt like a circus animal, but couldn't stop. Too many people depended on his earnings. Especially tragic were moments when drug intoxication showed on stage. Elvis might forget where he was, start telling audiences about his personal problems, or cry in the middle of a song. Fan Carolyn Kelly, who attended a 1976 concert in Omaha, remembered, "Elvis couldn't stand without support. 2 bodyguards held him up. He tried to sing, but words became incomprehensible mumbling." His final year became the nightmare's climax. In 1977, Elvis gave 55 concerts, but each performance was a test of survival. He regularly passed out in dressing rooms, was revived with smelling salts, and pushed onto stage. Dr. Nikopoulos accompanied all tours with an arsenal of drugs. Adrenaline for emergencies, cortisone for inflammation, morphine for pain. Concerts became medical procedures. In his final months, Elvis was literally dying on stage, testified sound engineer Al Devorin. His face was gray, breathing labored, voice barely audible, but the show went on. The audience's reaction was especially painful. Some fans continued cheering, not noticing their idol's decline. Others came to see the living ruins of a great artist, out of morbid curiosity. Some people bought tickets like it was a freak show, Lamar Fike said bitterly. They wanted to see what a dying legend looked like. For them, it was entertainment. Elvis's last concert was June 26, 1977 in Indianapolis, 7 weeks before his death. Witnesses remembered it as an hour of torture. The singer could barely stand, forgot words, fell to his knees several times. This wasn't a performance, but death throes broadcast to 18,000 spectators, wrote critic Robert Christgau, the saddest spectacle in popular music history. After the show, Elvis told his musicians, "Guys, I can't do this anymore. That was my last time." But even then, Parker was planning a September tour. On August 16, 1977, the agony ended, but the price was monstrous. 8 years of public suicide that several generations of fans were forced to witness. The story of Elvis's final concerts is an indictment of the entire entertainment industry. A system that turns people into commodities inevitably drives them to death. And the more money an artist makes, the fewer chances they have to stop and save their own life. Elvis Presley didn't die quietly at home. He died on stage before millions of people over 8 agonizing years. And that, perhaps, is the most terrible part of his tragedy. Throughout Elvis Presley's life, there were several crucial turning points where the right decision could have completely changed the course of events. By analyzing documents, testimonies from contemporaries, and medical reports, we can identify 5 critical moments when the fate of the king of rock and roll hung in the balance. First crossroads, 1955, choosing a manager. When 20-year-old Elvis was choosing between several offers, the alternative to Colonel Tom Parker could have been Oscar Davis, an experienced promoter who offered a standard 15% contract without exclusive rights. Davis planned to develop Elvis's career gradually and diversely, recordings, concerts, radio, but without binding Hollywood contracts. If Elvis had chosen Davis, he would have developed as a real musician, analyzed music historian Peter Guralnick. Without Parker, there wouldn't have been a decade of mediocre films, isolation from the world market, or total control over his creativity. Second crossroads, 1958, alternative to military service. After being drafted, Elvis had the option to request a deferment to finish filming King Creole. The studio was ready to pay all expenses, and congressmen promised support. Elvis refused, but what if he had agreed? An additional 2 years of active creative work from 1958 to 1960 could have solidified his position as a serious artist. Without the military break, he wouldn't have lost his musical momentum, and most importantly, Elvis wouldn't have met Priscilla in Germany. Elvis in 1958 was at his peak, said producer Sam Phillips. 2 more years of development, and he would have become untouchable by competitors. The Beatles emerged in 1962, but then they would have had to compete with an established genius. Third crossroads, 1960, rejecting Hollywood contracts. Returning from the Army, Elvis could have chosen a different career strategy. Instead of mass film production, focus on studio work, international tours, television specials. In 1960, he was offered a European tour for $1 million, huge money at the time, a BBC contract for a series of musical programs, and recording a concept album with Atlantic Records. Parker rejected all offers, but what if Elvis had insisted on his way? The 1960 European tour could have been a turning point, believed impresario Brian Epstein. Elvis would have been exposed to European musical culture, broadened his horizons, and possibly started experimenting. Fourth crossroads, 1968. After the comeback special, the triumph of the television special opened new opportunities. Offers from major producers, plans for international tours, ideas for concept albums. Instead, Elvis signed a contract with Las Vegas. Alternative scenarios included a studio album with the Beatles. John Lennon publicly expressed such a desire. A joint project with Bob Dylan, recording a gospel album with Aretha Franklin. In 1968, Elvis could have become a bridge between generations, explained critic Greil Marcus. Unite the old and new schools of American music. but he chose the safety of casinos over creative challenges. Fifth crossroads, 1973, medical intervention. By 1973, Elvis's drug addiction had become obvious to everyone. The U.S. already had celebrity rehabilitation programs and clinics for treating prescription drug addiction. Dr. Max Jacobson, John Kennedy's personal physician, offered an alternative treatment plan: gradual detox, psychotherapy, lifestyle changes. Elvis's family considered this possibility, but Parker blocked the initiative. Treatment in 1973 could have saved Elvis, claimed addiction specialist Dr. Forrest Tennant. His body wasn't completely destroyed yet. 3 years without drugs, and he could have returned to normal life. What was needed to save the king? Analysis of alternative scenarios shows that saving Elvis required not just one right decision, but systematic changes. 1. Independent management. Elvis needed a manager who thought about long-term career, not quick money. Such people existed: Albert Grossman, Bob Dylan's manager; Brian Epstein, The Beatles; David Geffen. Second, medical control. Elvis needed a principled family doctor who would put patient health above financial interests. In the 1970s, such doctors worked with other stars without scandals. 3. Healthy environment. Instead of the Memphis Mafia, Elvis needed real friends capable of telling him the truth. Examples include Johnny Cash's or Frank Sinatra's circles. 4th, creative challenges. Elvis needed constant artistic stimulation, working with different producers, collaborating with contemporary writers, experimenting with new genres. 5. Personal life. Elvis needed a mature woman partner, not a young girl to control. Among his acquaintances were suitable candidates: Linda Ronstadt, Barbra Streisand, Anne Margaret. The reality of alternatives. The main tragedy is that all these possibilities really existed. Elvis was offered better managers, better doctors, better creative projects. But the system that formed around him blocked any changes. Elvis had a chance to become the American Frank Sinatra, an artist who develops over decades, said critic Dave Marsh. The talent was sufficient. He lacked the character to break with his toxic environment. Elvis Presley could have lived to 80, recorded 20 more albums, given thousands of concerts worldwide, become a mentor to new generations of musicians. All the tools for this were in his hands, but he chose the comfort of dependency over the difficulty of freedom. And that choice proved fatal. August 16th, 1977, 3:30 p.m. local time. The world learned that Elvis Presley was dead. Within hours, radio stations across the globe interrupted their programming with breaking news. In Memphis, thousands gathered at the gates of Graceland. In New York, DJs wept on live air. In London, newspapers printed black mourning borders. But beneath the universal grief lay a darker truth. Elvis's death wasn't just the loss of a great performer. It was the first public autopsy of the toxic system that is modern show business. In the first days after the tragedy, the official story held firm. Heart attack, natural causes, no drugs involved. But within a month, autopsy details began leaking. Witnesses came forward, insiders started talking. By the end of 1977, the truth was clear. The king of rock and roll had died from an overdose of prescription drugs. This revelation shook the entertainment industry to its core. For the first time, people spoke publicly about what Hollywood and Nashville had known for years. The star management system had become legalized slavery, where talent becomes prisoner to its own success. Elvis's death opened Pandora's box, analyzed journalist Robert Christgau. People realized their idols weren't living in a fairy tale. They were surviving a nightmare created by the very people supposed to protect them. The first casualties were the main culprits. Dr. Nicopolis lost his medical license. Colonel Parker lost his reputation and much of Elvis's inheritance in court battles. But their personal responsibility was just the tip of the iceberg. Real change came to the industry's systemic problems. After Elvis's death, controls tightened on prescribing drugs to performers. Mandatory medical checkups were introduced for artists. On major tours, rehabilitation programs were created for addicted musicians. Management contract standards were completely revised. But most importantly, public consciousness changed. Elvis's death forced fans to think about the price of fame, about what hides behind their idols' stage smiles. Elvis became show business's sacrificial lamb, said sociologist Christopher Lasch. His death showed the world the true cost of mass entertainment. The medical consequences proved equally important. Elvis's case became a textbook study of prescription drug addiction, a dependency that in the 1970s was considered a respectable alternative to street drugs. Dr. Forrest Tennant, who studied Elvis's medical records, used them to develop new treatment methods for multiple drug dependency. His work saved hundreds of performers' lives in the 1980s and 90s. Elvis died so others could live, Tennant said. His medical history became a manual of how not to treat stars. The cultural impact of Elvis's death went even deeper. It ended the age of innocence in artist-audience relationships. After 1977, fans became more critical of their idols, more watchful of their health and behavior. A new type of music journalism emerged. Investigative reporting focused not on praising stars, but on examining the real conditions of their lives. Magazines like Rolling Stone, Spin, and NME began regularly publishing exposés about fame's dark side. After Elvis, nobody could pretend rock and roll was just music, stated critic Grail Marcus. It became clear this was also an industry that processed human lives. The legal aftermath stretched across decades. Elvis's heirs battled Colonel Parker through the mid-1980s, proving financial abuse. The family eventually regained control of the artist's creative legacy. These cases set crucial precedents for protecting artists' rights. Courts ruled that managers bear fiduciary responsibility to their clients, meaning they must put their artists' interests above their own. Presley versus Parker changed the entire industry, explained entertainment lawyer Don Engel. Now contracts with stars are written completely differently. The personal tragedies of those involved became warnings for new generations of artists. Dr. Nicopolis drank himself to death in poverty. Most of the Memphis Mafia never found their footing after their patron's death. Priscilla spent years in therapy for post-traumatic stress. Everyone who fed off Elvis eventually paid for it, concluded biographer Peter Guralnick. His death destroyed not just his own life, but the lives of all his enablers. Paradoxically, Elvis's musical legacy grew after his death. Freed from Parker's control, his music reached the world. Reissues, previously unreleased recordings, documentary albums, all introduced new generations to the King's genuine talent. But most importantly, Elvis's image in public consciousness transformed. From king of entertainment, he became a tragic hero, a symbol of talent crushed by the commercial machine. Death cleansed Elvis's image of all the artificial elements, said musicologist Dave Marsh. What remained was music, charisma, human drama. That proved far more powerful than any lifetime myth. Today, nearly half a century later, Elvis Presley's tragedy remains relevant. In our age of social media and global show business, young artists face the same problems: toxic managers, drug dependency, isolation from reality. But now they have the king of rock and roll's cautionary tale. And perhaps this example will save the lives of those who might otherwise repeat his path. Elvis Presley died needlessly, but his death was not meaningless. It changed the entertainment world, made it slightly more human, slightly less cruel to its idols. Perhaps this is the true legacy of the Graceland tragedy, a warning to future generations that talent without protection becomes a death sentence. Thank you for watching to the end. If you liked it, please like, subscribe, and don't forget to click on the bell so you don't miss new videos. And there are more amazing stories to come. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.